Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 108 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I discuss current events related to foreign policy, international affairs, and global news, and then give analysis on those events. So if that is something that you're interested in and want to help spread the word about what's going on in the world, please take the time to share the show, thelibertarianinstitute.org, foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, or you could just visit my Facebook page, Kyle's Files, and share the show from there. Either way, I really do appreciate retweets, whatever you got. I saw some of you added ratings and reviews on iTunes. Really appreciate that. That does help the show to get out there to more people higher up when people search like foreign policy. Foreign Policy Focus is now one of the top podcasts that appears on iTunes. So that's really cool. Things are getting better for the podcast, and it's because everybody's taking the time to get out there to new listeners. First thing I want to talk about today is probably the most important thing I will talk about today, although there's not a ton of analysis to put on that, and it's the United States is preparing to put nuclear bombers on 24-hour alert. Currently, the United States has nuclear bombers, nuclear weapons in Guam, and so they could, take off from there, the B-1B bombers, and then go attack North Korea pretty quickly. And also, North Korea is right on the border with China and Russia, so obviously attack those other targets as well. Right now, I guess the planes are, I don't know if they're in the hangars or on the runways or whatever, but they're, not saying they're gassed up, ready to go with the nuclear bombs launched in them already. And what putting them on 24 hours notice would do, I guess, be taking a couple of these planes, having them already on the runway, ready to go at a moment's notice, should Donald Trump tell them to go bomb Kim Jong-un. The obvious problem with this is it just gives less time for information to come in. As Patrick Coburn, I think the best way to put it, we're just that much closer to midnight now, obviously, meaning the, clock to doomsday that was going on with the Soviet Union and the United States. And that was, how close till the nuclear weapons start falling and then everybody on the planet's dead. Cause that's really what we're looking at here, is that once the nuclear bombs start falling, it's very, I guess, there's a very real possibility that once the nuclear weapons start falling, that they don't stop, and then everybody is dead. And so whenever we're looking at Donald Trump being able to that much easier and that much quicker decide he's gonna kick this whole thing off is very, very dangerous. The USS John McCain, that was already damaged from running into a commercial ship near an island in the South China Sea, has taken on a 4-inch crack in the hull, which I guess is a very serious thing to have happen. The McCain was en route, I believe, to the Philippines to get repaired. I couldn't believe it. So the USS John McCain was actually like on this gigantic barge. They had it propped up on there. And I really didn't know that USS destroyers were carted around by other ships, but apparently that happens when they get damaged. So if you guys want to look in the show notes at that story, there's a nice picture on there and it's worth checking out because it's not something you see every day. I also find stories like this where you have like a really cool picture or something interesting is an easy way to rope somebody into a conversation on foreign policy. You could like kind of take your laptop or your phone and say, hey, look at this picture. Isn't this crazy? This is a USS destroyer right here, propped up on a barge. And then, what's it doing up there? Well, in order to show the Chinese how, in charge the Americans were, the USS John McCain was sailing around these islands in the South China Sea and ran into a cargo ship because the USS John McCain didn't have a locator on. And so now you have this whole policy. You got roped into them talking to you about the South China Sea and US China policy. And, while issues like putting the nuclear bombers on 24-hour alert is certainly an interesting and important story, I think to some people, the concept of, the worldwide genocide is just so impossible to comprehend that they kind of just ignore the story or don't engage in the conversation with you. But the USS John McCain, the conversation starts off light and then gets interesting. So just something, something to think about when you're trying to talk to people about these ideas that we have. We have Iran's foreign minister announcing that Iran will not renegotiate on the Iranian nuclear deal. I had talked about this a few weeks ago on the show that before Trump decertified the deal, Iran said they wouldn't renegotiate the deal. Now they're saying the same thing after the decertification. I think from Iran's perspective, they gave up probably everything they were willing to. I mean, a good chunk of their centrifuges, one of their biggest nuclear reactors, their ability to hold any amount of heavy water or make their own anti-cancer drugs. It was really a blow to them in their civilian nuclear energy program. So I can't see Iran wanting to give up more up front. Also, Iran's already given up a lot. They poured the concrete in the reactor, they destroyed the centrifuges, they put the cap on the heavy water. So in order to rebuild all these things, it is a lot of infrastructure and a lot of money. So if, they renegotiate, then they probably see themselves in a very weakened position. I think this just goes to show that Trump's plan on the Iran deal won't work. I had thought that maybe, the Iranians should negotiate and then made some concessions that were kind of meaningless to them. Because I'm sure Donald Trump is like 99% of other Americans and has no absolute clue what the hell, you need to make a nuclear bomb or anything like that. And is just, tweeting out on the toilet every morning ridiculous things and then reading some, Reuters headlines and some Fox News headlines and scrolling through the Drudge Report. And he's made his decision on Iran. We had some interesting statements from CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who said the CIA will become a more vicious agency. This is, kind of a scary statement to make, the CIA becoming a more vicious agency. We already know the kind of things the CIA has been up to really since its creation in World War II. And I'm not talking about more of the conspiracy-minded stuff like the CIA had JFK assassinated, but I'm talking about the coup d'etats and the overthrows, supporting of, drug lords in South America against the communists, and just a whole host of other really ridiculous and undermined drug running schemes and all this other stuff that was really dangerous and terrible. And that organization becoming more vicious is terrifying. Also, hearing people like Ray McGovern speak, I've heard them talk about how there's kind of maybe not an internal battle within the CIA, but there's definitely a difference between those who are analysts and those who are kind of agents. The agents are the ones out running around blowing people up, where the analysts are just kind of sitting there parsing through the information. Some of the points that Ray McGovern makes is that, the people who are reading the information, getting all the important news, they're the ones that are really doing the work that protects America, while the agents are out there killing people and creating mischief and nonsense. Of course, there, is definitely roles for agents to go out there and try to, switch, create double agents or switch sides or whatever like that. But that's a, far cry from assassinations, which is apparently what the CIA is planning to do in Afghanistan, where they now are sending, a handful of seasoned agents to Afghanistan to take on the Taliban. I think this is a pretty scary program. I'm concerned about, what will actually end up happening in Afghanistan with the CIA there. But more importantly, if Trump likes this plan and he thinks this plan is successful, it sounds like kind of a Trumpian plan, something that would appeal to Donald Trump, like kill them all, appeals to Donald Trump. Sending in the CIA to take out the really bad guys and knowing that you got the really bad guys really dead sounds like some Donald Trump would like. Hopefully he doesn't expand the role of the CIA too much. The last time this happened, of course, we got Guantanamo Bay and torture agencies and drone programs and targeted assassinations and all kind of other disturbing stuff. Other news out of Afghanistan is that we have the Taliban continuing to just carry out raid after raid there. Lots of suicide bombings, lots of problems for the United States and our Afghani army that we've trained and armed and funded there. I guess in Kandahar we had the Taliban destroying an entire army base and killing upwards of 50 people. And we know we have this huge gold soldier problem in the Afghani army where people come, they collect a couple paychecks, they take their rifles, and then they leave the army and desert it. This has been a long-standing practice in the army and a big problem for the army. And I'm sure part of the reason why is because if you go join the army, you're probably going to get blown up by the Taliban. Other news is that apparently we had a surprise visit from Rex Tillerson, visiting Kabul, Afghanistan today. I'm not sure why, and I'm kind of surprised he did. Mattis, of course, was targeted when he was in Kabul. There's been a few terror attacks in the past couple of weeks in Kabul. And so it almost seems a little chancy that Tillerson would be going to Kabul, but he is there now. I'm not sure what he's doing there or saying there. I'm sure it's going to be something terrible. If it's too bad, I'll definitely be talking about it on the next show. And then the other story I have is just an interesting report that came out on Afghanistan saying that 13% of Afghani military junior officers who come to the United States to train end up leaving and going AWOL. 83 of these people have never been found. I find it curious that this hasn't been a program that Trump is much more concerned about. It seems one of his biggest concerns was, having people in the country that should be in the country. And here we have a very rampant problem where the military brings these people in and they can't control where they go. So people were given military training who are just disappearing in the United States. Before going to Afghanistan, Tillerson was in Saudi Arabia talking about how he was hoping Saudi Arabia would move closer to Iraq to counter Iranian influence in Iraq. I'm not quite sure that if that will happen or that will work out. If you remember, I've talked about this in the past, but back in 2003 when the United States killed Saddam Hussein, that was a huge victory for Iran. Huge victory for Iran. This moved the government in Iraq closer to Iran. The United States then proceeded to fight a civil war on behalf of the Iranian-linked, I believe, Dawa party in Baghdad, and essentially cleansed the city of Baghdad of Sunni, and, really made it a Shiite city and Shiite government that rules Iraq. Iran has also provided Iraq a lot of support in the battle against ISIS. They have funded and trained several militias, I believe mostly Iraqi Shia, that have gone on to fight against ISIS. These forces are the Popular Mobilization Forces, and they are absolutely 100% backed by the United States, at least up until now, because we have Rex Tillerson telling them that they either need to go home or join the Iraqi army. I'm not sure how much sway the United States holds here and if they could really do anything about it if these militants decide to just stay in their militias and not join up the Iraqi army or not. However, it is now a demand of Rex Tillerson. And we also have Tillerson making a feeble plea for Qatar and Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, several other countries to resolve their diplomatic differences. I don't think this will happen. Qatar seems pretty, content where they are, moving closer to Turkey and Iran in exchange for moving away from Saudi Arabia. We had some news coming out of Spain over the weekend, maybe not the huge news that wasn't anticipated, but the Spanish Prime Minister called for the Parliament of Spain to grant him the power to dissolve the Catalonian government. The Catalan president responded by saying that he hopes their parliament will grant a strong response to this, threat from the president of Spain. I believe the Catalan parliament is meeting Thursday to decide a course of action on where to go from here. We're getting more and more details on what happened in Niger. Apparently there were 12 Green Berets on a training mission where they were meeting with some tribal elders in a remote part of Niger near the Mali border. When they were leaving that meeting in unarmored vehicles, they were fired upon by 50 some odd militants. Those militants are now believed to be part of a local ISIS affiliate, although probably just, the local jihadist guys. Not necessarily, all that concerned with maybe creating a caliphate or about al-Baghdadi or Zarqawi, but, they are jihadists. They believe the jihadist message, and here they have U.S. troops and they're going to attack them. I guess in the initial fighting, we had 3 U.S. soldiers killed, 2 being wounded, and 1 being MIA. The militants were scared off by French jets that were, close in the area. Of course, France was big on colonization of Africa and continues to push for Western interventionism, particularly United States interventionism in Northern Africa. Of course, this is, Libya, Mali, Algeria, etc. I guess the French planes were not actually authorized to drop bombs or fire on the militants, so I guess they just scared them away by flying in the area. Along with the Green Berets killed, we had 9 members of the Niger military killed. Troops were eventually evacuated, I believe, from a private French company, and then there was 1 MIA whose body was found, I believe, 48 hours later. The big thing in the media is to distract from this story by discussing Trump's calls to the widows and all this other stuff that, don't get me wrong, it's somewhat meaningful. People died here, they left loved ones behind, and it's very important that we don't forget that. Sometimes I think on the show and other people within the kind of anti-war, anti-interventionist movement tend to say, well, this is nonsense that distracts from the story, but it's a very real point, and I think a very real point that supports our side, that these are real people that end up dying over there, and their loved ones miss them very much, and their lives are completely turned over, in some cases completely ruined. So moving forward though on, and back to the more analytical part of this, of what happened in Niger, there are several things that point to kind of what the problem was. One was the lack of overhead surveillance. I don't know how old everyone is, but I remember back, I believe 2003, 2004, when I get to go with my grandparents and watch cable TV, there was always these commercials on where they had a drone, and, the drone sees the militants sneaking up behind the U.S. soldiers and saves them, because then, now they have the upper hand. I'm not sure, how much of a difference it would have made if there was a drone overhead. I'm guessing that they would have been able to probably detect 50 militants. That seems like an awful lot of people. However, kind of putting the blame in the wrong spot, right? The troops shouldn't have been out there in the first place. Not that they needed more help, but that they probably shouldn't have been there, right? One of the interesting things is that there's a senior congressional aide who's really pushing this lack of intelligence thing and pushing overhead drone support. Over the past several years, the United States has been increasing their drone activity in Africa, specifically West Africa. We have a ever increasing drone base in Cameroon. The United States now has, I believe, 200 troops in Cameroon. And those troops are, largely stationed at a drone base and responsible for this drone program that operates in the area. As the drone base has gotten bigger and more troops are over there, it becomes more public, more people know about it, it requires more funding, so it has to be more blatant and obvious in the budget. And so I think this will be an excuse for them to kind of cover up the fact that they've been expanding this program for a long time. One of the things that this has exposed is that the United States has 8,000 troops in Africa. This comes as an absolute surprise to some people. One thing I was surprised about is not only, I believe, 25% of the troops are in Djibouti, which is where the United States has their big base in Africa. 2,000 troops are there. I believe there's now 1,000 in Niger, 200 in Cameroon, and then troops scattered throughout various other African countries. I'm sure maybe some that are, off the record, more so than others. The Intercept does a good job at kind of documenting the expanding U.S. drone program in Africa, and I'll be sure to link to that article in the show notes. News from Syria, we have Israel attacking the Syrian Arab Army in the southwestern area of Syria, the area near the Golan Heights. This has happened a few times. What will happen is stray mortar fire will end up venturing into the Syrian. I believe it was in 84 that Israel took the Golan Heights from Syria and then has just occupied it ever since. So every time some stray mortar fire from the Syrian Arab Army battling with the jihadist rebels near the border with the Golan Heights goes into Israel, whether it's from the Syrian army or allied forces or from the jihadists, and then we'll just start bombing Saudi positions. The last time this happened, I read somebody, I believe Moon of Alabama, just pretty much blatantly accused the rebels of firing mortar fire into the Golan Heights on purpose in order to provoke this response from the Israelis. The Israelis, of course, claim it was Hezbollah that's trying to pick a fight between Israel and Syria, responsible for this. Although the Israeli story seems made up, I don't see why Hezbollah will want war between Israel and Syria. Other news out of Syria is that BuzzFeed, with Jason Leopold, has filed a FOIA to get documents on the one secret program arming Syrian jihadist rebels. Trump, I guess, declassified that program by tweeting about it, so it'll be very interesting to see where we go from here. I think this is great news. The battle for Raqqa is over. We have 1,800 killed in that battle, 1,300 by the United States. These are the deaths that Air Wars was able to confirm, likely happened. They knew that the United States bombed this neighborhood on this day, and here's these dead bodies. Now, this likely means there's a whole lot of other civilians who were killed, but whose bodies were either buried in the rubble or obliterated by the bombs and mortar, whatever else completely, and they will never be found or counted. The last thing I will say is that apparently the YPG is now holding 2 Americans. The last thing I would like to know is that the Syrian Democratic Forces, the kind of Kurdish-backed force that the United States is supporting in Syria, feels they have been given orders by Western countries to kill foreign fighters from the West they come across. And so if that turns out to be true, that's going to create quite a problem for some of these Western countries. Some of these countries have populations that are very, very, very against the death penalty and, consider it murder and all kinds of other stuff. So, countries like France or Sweden may face a lot of trouble at home with an issue like this. ISIS is largely lost most of their territory. I think they continue to kind of burn through capital cities and really don't have a capital city left, just a few small cities in the desert area in Syria and Iraq. I'm not sure how long it's going to take for Iraq and Syria and, whatever other allied forces fighting against these ISIS fighters until they're all gone. But, I'm sure for the months to come, ISIS will claim hold to some city somewhere in Iraq or Syria. I know that they took some villages, in the kind of mess where the Peshmerga withdrew and the Iraqi government took back a bunch of territory that the Kurdish had held since 2014. some villages were left wide open for ISIS to swoop in and take back over. So we may see issues like that as the YPG and SDF work out deals with the Syrian Arab Army and the Iraqi government does with either militias or Kurdish fighters as well, but it doesn't seem like ISIS is completely gone in these territories, but overall the Islamic State Caliphate is pretty much done. So that's where I'll wrap up the show for today, everyone. I hope you liked the show. foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, the libertarianinstitute.org, or the Facebook page Kyle's Files, at KYAAALE on Twitter, and KylesFilesblog.com for the daily news roundup. Thanks, everyone.